I woke up at 5:30 that morning, not because my alarm went off, but because my heart wouldn't let me sleep any longer. Today was the day I'd been dreaming about since Charles proposed to me on that snowy December evening 8 months ago. The sunlight was already creeping through the curtains of my hotel room at the Grand Boston Harbor, painting everything in soft gold. My hands were shaking as I reached for my phone to check the weather one more time. Clear skies, 68 degrees. Perfect. Everything had to be perfect today, and so far it was. Sarah, my maid of honor, knocked on the door at exactly 6, carrying 2 steaming cups of coffee and a bag of croissants from that little French bakery on Newberry Street. She'd been my best friend since college, and she knew me well enough to bring caffeine before attempting any conversation. "Ready for this, bride?" she asked, setting everything down on the small table by the window. I nodded, though my stomach was doing somersaults. "I think so. God, I hope so." The next few hours passed in a blur of hair curlers, makeup brushes, and nervous laughter. My mother arrived at 8 with my grandmother's pearl earrings, the ones I'd always admired as a little girl. She fastened them carefully, her fingers gentle against my neck. "You look beautiful, sweetheart," she whispered, and I saw tears forming in her eyes. Charles is a lucky man. By 10, the bridal suite was buzzing with activity. Sarah was steaming my dress, while my cousin Emma worked on the flower arrangements for our hair. The photographer, a sweet woman named Linda, moved around us quietly, capturing moments I knew I'd treasure forever. The dress itself was everything I'd imagined when I was a little girl playing dress-up in my mother's closet. Simple ivory silk that flowed like water, with delicate lace sleeves that my grandmother had worn in her own wedding photo from 1952. When I slipped it on, I felt like I was carrying generations of love with me. At 11:30, we made our way to St. Mary's Cathedral. The church had been in Charles's family for 3 generations, and when he'd shown it to me the first time, I'd known immediately it was where we belonged. The stone walls seemed to hold decades of prayers and promises, and the stained glass windows cast rainbow patterns across the wooden pews. The flowers were exactly what I'd envisioned during those late-night planning sessions with our wedding coordinator. White roses and baby's breath cascaded from every surface, with touches of eucalyptus that filled the air with the most incredible scent. The string quartet Charles had surprised me with was already playing softly near the altar, and I could hear the gentle murmur of guests settling into their seats. My father appeared at my side, looking handsome in his navy suit, though I could see the emotion in his eyes. He'd walk me down hallways when I took my first steps, down school corridors on my first day of kindergarten, and across the stage at my college graduation. But this walk would be different. This walk was leading me to my future. "You sure about this one?" he asked quietly, adjusting his tie for the 3rd time. I looked through the small window in the church doors and saw Charles standing at the altar, his hands clasped behind his back. Even from this distance, I could see he was nervous too, shifting his weight from one foot to the other the way he did when he was thinking hard about something. He looked up toward the back of the church, searching for me, and when our eyes met through the glass, his whole face lit up with that smile that had made me fall in love with him in the first place. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," I told my father. The music shifted to the wedding march, and the heavy wooden doors opened. A hush fell over the congregation as we began our walk down the aisle. I saw familiar faces everywhere, college friends, co-workers, Charles's large Irish family taking up 3 entire pews on the right side. Mrs. Patterson from next door was dabbing her eyes with a tissue. My old boss from the marketing firm was there with his wife, both of them beaming. But mostly I saw Charles. He was crying, not bothering to wipe away the tears that were streaming down his face. His best man, his brother Mike, handed him a handkerchief, but Charles barely noticed. He was looking at me like I was the only person in the room, like I was everything he'd ever wanted. Each step brought me closer to him, closer to the life we'd planned together. The little apartment in Cambridge we'd just bought. The garden we wanted to plant next spring. The conversations about kids we'd been having more frequently lately, both of us getting braver about admitting we wanted to be parents together. The cathedral felt enormous and intimate all at once. Light streamed through the windows, illuminating the faces of everyone I loved most in this world. The string quartet's music seemed to lift us all up, carrying us towards something sacred and new. When we finally reached the altar, my father kissed my cheek and placed my hand in Charles's. His fingers were warm and steady, and suddenly all my nerves disappeared. This was right. This was home. Father McKenna, who had baptized Charles when he was a baby, stepped forward with his worn leather Bible. He'd performed hundreds of weddings in this same spot, but he was smiling like this was his first. He looked out at our guests, then back at us, and opened his mouth to speak. That's when we heard the heavy wooden doors creak open behind us. The sound cut through the cathedral like a knife through silk. Every head turned, including mine and Charles's. The music stopped mid-note, leaving only the echo of the doors settling on their ancient hinges and the soft whisper of fabric as 200 people shifted in their seats to look behind them. At first, I couldn't make sense of what I was seeing. A small figure stood silhouetted in the doorway, backlit by the afternoon sun streaming in from the street. For a moment, I thought maybe it was one of Charles's little cousins who had gotten lost on their way to the bathroom, or perhaps a flower girl from another wedding who had wandered into the wrong ceremony. But then she started walking. Her footsteps echoed against the marble floor with a determination that seemed impossible for someone so small. She couldn't have been more than 5 years old, wearing a yellow sundress that was slightly too big for her, with dark hair pulled back in 2 neat braids. She walked straight down the center aisle, past confused relatives and wide-eyed guests, her chin raised like she owned the place. I felt Charles's hand tighten around mine. Father McKenna took a small step backward, his Bible still open but forgotten. The silence in the cathedral was so complete I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. The little girl stopped about 10 feet away from the altar and looked directly at me. Her eyes were huge and dark, filled with something that looked like recognition mixed with hurt and anger. She opened her mouth, and what came out made my knees buckle. "Why did you leave me, Mommy?" The words hung in the air like smoke. Someone in the congregation gasped audibly. I heard my mother make a small, confused sound from the front pew. Charles's grip on my hand loosened, and I felt him turn to look at me, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from the child. She was still staring at me, waiting for an answer I didn't have. Her lower lip was trembling now, and I could see tears forming in those dark eyes that seemed so familiar and so impossible all at once. "Why did you leave me?" she asked again, louder this time, her voice breaking on the last word. Before I could find my voice, or my breath, or any part of my brain that was still functioning, another figure appeared in the doorway. A woman in her 40s, looking absolutely frantic, rushed in after the child. She was slightly out of breath, her hair disheveled, clutching a purse against her chest like a shield. "Emma, no," she called out, her voice echoing off the cathedral walls. "Come back here right now." But the little girl, Emma, didn't move. She pointed directly at me with one small finger, her voice carrying clearly through the stunned silence. "That's her. That's my mommy. I told you she would come back. I told you she would be wearing white." The woman reached Emma and tried to take her hand, but the child pulled away, never breaking eye contact with me. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. The silk of my dress suddenly felt too tight, the cathedral too small, the faces staring at us too many. The woman looked up at me, and I saw terror in her eyes. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, but her voice carried in the acoustics of the church. "She's been saying this for weeks. She saw your picture in the newspaper, the engagement announcement. She kept insisting it was her mother. I didn't know what to do. I tried to explain, but she wouldn't listen. She said she had to come see for herself." Charles was looking between me and the child, his face a mixture of confusion and growing understanding. I wanted to explain, to tell him this was some kind of mistake, some terrible coincidence. But something deep in my chest was twisting with a recognition I didn't want to acknowledge. Her eyes, those dark, serious eyes that seemed to look right through me. I knew those eyes, not from this child, but from someone else. From a man I had tried very hard to forget, whose face I had pushed out of my memory along with everything else from that time in my life. "Ma'am," Father McKenna said gently, addressing the woman. "Perhaps we could step outside and discuss this privately." But Emma shook her head violently. "No, I want to talk to my mommy. You said she was dead, but I knew she wasn't. I knew she would come back." She looked at me again, and her voice became smaller, more vulnerable. "I've been waiting for you. I drew pictures of you. I knew you'd be beautiful and wearing white when you came back." My vision blurred. The cathedral seemed to tilt around me. Charles said my name softly, questioningly, but I could barely hear him over the rushing in my ears. I was looking at this child who couldn't possibly be mine, who had to be some kind of mistake, but whose presence was unlocking doors in my memory that I had sealed shut years ago. The woman, who I now realized must be some kind of foster mother or caretaker, was looking at me with a mixture of desperation and something that might have been hope. Could you possibly be? She couldn't finish the question. I opened my mouth to deny it, to explain that there had been some terrible misunderstanding. But no words came out, because suddenly I was remembering things I had buried so deep I thought they were gone forever. A hospital room 6 years ago, forms I had signed with shaking hands. A baby I had held for exactly 10 minutes before making the hardest decision of my life. Emma took a step closer to me, and I could see she had a small scar above her left eyebrow, shaped like a crescent moon. My breath caught. I remembered that scar. I remembered sitting in an emergency room when she was 3, holding her while they stitched it up after she fell off a playground swing. Except that was impossible. I wasn't there when she was 3. I had given up the right to be there. But I remembered it anyway, like a dream that felt more real than waking life. Charles's voice seemed to come from very far away. "Sweetheart, do you know this child?" I looked at him, my husband-to-be, this good man who loved me and thought he knew me, and realized that our perfect wedding day was about to become something else entirely. Something that would change everything we thought we knew about our future together. I started, but my voice was barely a whisper. "I don't know. I think maybe." Emma was still looking at me with those impossibly familiar eyes, and I knew with a certainty that made me dizzy that my past had just walked into my future, demanding answers I wasn't sure I was brave enough to give. 6 years ago, I was a completely different person living a completely different life. I was 22, working 2 part-time jobs, and barely making rent on a studio apartment in Somerville that was so small I could touch both walls if I stretched out my arms. I was dating someone I thought I loved, a guy named Marcus who seemed charming and exciting until he wasn't anymore. The relationship turned ugly fast. What started as jealousy became control, and what started as control became something darker. He had this way of making me feel like everything was my fault, like I was crazy for questioning him when he disappeared for days at a time, or when I found texts from other women on his phone. He'd apologize with flowers and promises, and I'd believe him because I wanted to believe him, because I was young and didn't know any better. When I found out I was pregnant, I was terrified to tell him. We were barely holding things together as it was, and I knew a baby would either fix everything or destroy what was left. It destroyed what was left. He accused me of getting pregnant on purpose to trap him, called me names I'd never heard anyone call another human being, and disappeared that same night. I never saw him again. I spent the next 7 months working at a coffee shop during the day and cleaning offices at night, trying to save enough money to prepare for a baby I had no idea how to raise. My parents had disowned me when I dropped out of college to be with Marcus, and I was too proud to crawl back to them begging for help. I had exactly $300 in my savings account and a pile of medical bills I couldn't pay. The labor was hard. 18 hours at Boston Medical Center, most of it alone except for a nurse named Patricia who held my hand and told me I was braver than I knew. When Emma was born, though she didn't have a name yet then, she was perfect and tiny and had these dark eyes that seemed to look right through me, like she was asking me questions I didn't have answers for. I held her for 10 minutes. 10 minutes of feeling like my heart might burst from how much I loved this little person I'd just met. 10 minutes of whispering promises I wasn't sure I could keep. 10 minutes of trying to memorize every detail of her face so I'd never forget it. Then Patricia came back with the social worker, a kind woman named Mrs. Rodriguez who had been working with me throughout my pregnancy. We'd talked about my options dozens of times, but until that moment, holding my daughter in the hospital bed, I don't think I really understood what any of it meant. "Are you sure about this, honey?" Mrs. Rodriguez asked me gently. "There's no pressure. You can take her home, and we'll figure out the support you need." But I looked around that sterile hospital room and thought about my apartment with its broken heater and the roaches that came out at night. I thought about the jobs I'd have to quit because I couldn't afford childcare, about the bills piling up on my kitchen counter, about all the things I couldn't give her that she deserved to have. Most of all, I thought about Marcus and his anger, and how I never wanted my daughter to see the kind of relationship I'd thought was normal. I wanted her to grow up knowing what love looked like, real love, not the twisted thing I'd convinced myself was enough. "I'm sure," I whispered, though saying it felt like tearing my own heart out. I want her to have everything. I want her to have parents who can give her everything. The foster family Mrs. Rodriguez had found was perfect on paper. The Hendersons were in their 30s, had been trying to have children for years, and lived in a beautiful house in Lexington with a yard and good schools and all the stability I couldn't provide. They were there within an hour, nervous and excited, and so grateful they could barely speak. I signed the papers with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. Mrs. Henderson held Emma while I wrote my name over and over again, giving up my rights, giving up my claim to this perfect little person who'd been part of me for 9 months. "Would you like to choose a name for her?" Mrs. Henderson asked. "We were thinking Emma, but if you have something special in mind." Emma. It was perfect. It meant whole, universal. Everything I wanted her to be. I kissed her forehead one last time, breathing in that new baby smell that I knew I'd remember for the rest of my life. Then I walked out of that hospital room and tried to pretend that part of my life had never happened. The next few years were a blur of healing and rebuilding. I went back to school, got my degree in marketing, found a good job. I moved to Cambridge, started therapy, learned how to be alone without being lonely. I convinced myself I'd made the right choice, that Emma was better off without me, that someday when I was ready I'd find her again and she'd understand why I had to leave. But life kept moving forward. I met Charles at a company picnic 3 years ago, and he was everything Marcus hadn't been: kind, stable, patient with my walls and my fears. He made me laugh, made me feel safe, made me believe I deserved good things. When he proposed, I thought I'd finally left my past behind completely. I never told him about Emma. I told myself it was because the pain was too personal, too complicated to explain. But really, I was terrified he'd look at me differently, that he'd think I was the kind of person who could abandon her own child. I was terrified he'd be right. Every year on Emma's birthday, I'd drive by the Hendersons' house in Lexington just to catch a glimpse of her playing in the yard or walking to school. I'd see her growing up from a distance, watch her become a real person with friends and hobbies and a life that had nothing to do with me. She looked happy, healthy, loved. It broke my heart and filled it at the same time. Last year, I drove by and saw a for sale sign in their front yard. I panicked. I called Mrs. Rodriguez, who told me the Hendersons had moved to the West Coast for Mr. Henderson's job, but that Emma was still in the system, staying with a wonderful foster mother named Anna Morrison who lived in Cambridge. She was living 15 minutes away from me, and I didn't know it. I told myself I'd reach out when Charles and I got settled after the wedding. I told myself there would be time to figure out how to explain everything, how to become part of her life without turning it upside down. I told myself I could wait a little longer. But standing in that cathedral, looking into eyes that were unmistakably Marcus's but set in a face that was definitely mine, I realized that some decisions can't be undone or postponed or explained away. Some decisions follow you no matter how far you run, and sometimes they show up at the worst possible moment wearing a yellow dress and asking questions you're not prepared to answer. Emma was still looking at me, waiting for me to say something, to acknowledge what she somehow knew in her 5-year-old heart to be true. Behind her, Anna Morrison watched with a mixture of hope and fear, probably wondering if this was the moment that would change everything for the little girl she'd been caring for. And Charles was beside me, my almost husband, waiting for me to explain how our perfect wedding day had suddenly become something else entirely. The silence in the cathedral stretched on for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. I could feel 200 pairs of eyes on me, waiting for me to say something, to explain, to make sense of what was happening. But I couldn't find my voice. I couldn't find anything except the sound of my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. Charles cleared his throat softly, and when he spoke, his voice was steady and calm in a way that made me love him and break for him at the same time. "Ladies and gentlemen, I think we need to take a brief intermission." He looked out at our guests with that politician smile he used when he was trying to keep everything together at work. "If you could please make your way to the reception hall at the Fairmont, we'll join you shortly." Father McKenna nodded quickly, seeming grateful for someone to take charge. "Yes, of course. The cocktail hour can begin early. Please, everyone, let's give the family some privacy." The guests began to murmur and shuffle out of their pews, but nobody moved quickly. I could hear fragments of whispered conversations as they passed. Did she say mommy? Who was that child? I had no idea. My mother caught my eye from the front row, her face a mask of confusion and concern, but Charles's brother Mike gently guided her toward the exit along with everyone else. Anna Morrison had managed to coax Emma to sit in one of the front pews, though the little girl kept looking over her shoulder at me. Even from 10 feet away, I could see she was crying quietly, her small shoulders shaking. When the last guest had filed out and the heavy doors closed behind them, the cathedral felt enormous and empty. The flowers still smelled beautiful, the light still streamed through the stained glass windows, but everything felt different now, like we were standing in the ruins of something rather than at the beginning of it. Charles took my hand and led me to the small room behind the altar where Father McKenna kept his vestments and where brides usually waited before walking down the aisle. It was cramped and windowless, lit by a single overhead bulb that made everything look harsh and unforgiving. We sat on the small bench, still in our wedding clothes, and looked at each other. Charles's bow tie was slightly crooked, and I reached up automatically to fix it, the way I'd done 100 times before. But my hands were shaking so badly I couldn't manage it. "Is it true?" he asked finally, his voice barely above a whisper. I wanted to lie. God help me. I wanted to look him in the eye and tell him this was all some terrible mistake, that I'd never seen that child before in my life. I wanted to go back to 20 minutes ago when we were just Charles and Rebecca getting married in a beautiful church surrounded by people who loved us. Instead, I nodded. Yes. The word hung between us like a physical thing. Charles closed his eyes and leaned back against the wall, and I watched his face go through about 6 different emotions in the space of 10 seconds. "Her name is Emma," I said, because the silence was killing me. "She's 5 years old. I haven't seen her since the day she was born." "Jesus, Rebecca." He opened his eyes and looked at me, and I could see he was trying to process something that didn't fit with anything he thought he knew about me. "Why didn't you tell me?" It was the question I'd been dreading for 3 years, ever since I'd fallen in love with him and realized this relationship was going somewhere permanent. I'd practiced answers in my head, imagined conversations where I explained everything and he understood and held me while I cried. But now, sitting in this tiny room in my wedding dress with our guests waiting at the hotel, all those practiced words seemed completely inadequate. "I was scared," I said finally. "I was scared you'd think less of me. I was scared you'd think I was the kind of person who could abandon her own child." "Are you?" he asked, and his voice was so quiet I almost didn't hear him. The question hit me like a physical blow. "I don't know," I whispered. "I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought I was giving her a better life. But seeing her today," I couldn't finish the sentence. Charles was quiet for a long time, staring at his hands. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, not angry, exactly, but something I'd never heard from him before. "You should have told me. When we started talking about getting married, about having kids someday, you should have told me you already had a child." "I know. We talked about wanting to be parents together. We talked about what kind of family we wanted to build. And all that time, you had a daughter you'd never mentioned." "I know." I was crying now, ugly tears that were probably ruining my makeup, but I didn't care. "I know I should have told you. I wanted to tell you so many times, but I didn't know how. I didn't know how to explain why I gave her up, why I thought that was the right choice." "Do you still think it was the right choice?" I looked at him through my tears, this man I loved more than I'd ever loved anyone, who was supposed to be my husband by now. "I don't know anymore. 6 years ago, I was 22 and broke and scared out of my mind. I thought I was giving her parents who could take care of her the way she deserved. But seeing her today, hearing her ask why I left her, I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand. I don't know if there was a right choice." Charles reached over and took my hand, and for a moment I thought maybe everything would be okay. Maybe he'd hold me and tell me we'd figure this out together, that our love was strong enough to handle this. Instead, he said, "I need some time to think." Those 6 words broke something inside me that I hadn't even known was still whole. "What does that mean?" "It means I don't know what to do with this, Rebecca. An hour ago, I thought I was marrying someone I knew everything about. Now I find out you have a child you've never mentioned, and she just interrupted our wedding to ask why you abandoned her." He stood up and ran his hands through his hair, messing up the careful styling his sister had spent an hour on that morning. "I need to process this. I need to figure out what this means for us. Charles, please. I know I should have told you, but I love you. That hasn't changed. We can work through this." He looked at me for a long moment, and I could see the conflict in his eyes. "I love you too. That's not the question. The question is whether I can marry someone who kept something this big from me for 3 years. The question is what else you haven't told me. Nothing, I said quickly. There's nothing else. This is it, I swear. How do I know that? How do I trust that? I didn't have an answer for that, because he was right. I had lied to him, by omission if not outright, for our entire relationship. I had let him fall in love with a version of me that wasn't complete, that was missing the most important and complicated part of my history. What about Emma? I asked. What about that little girl sitting out there who thinks I'm her mother? I don't know, he said, and his voice was so tired he sounded like a different person. I honestly don't know, but I can't think about that right now. I can't think about anything right now except the fact that our wedding is supposed to be happening in 20 minutes, and instead we're sitting here talking about your secret daughter. He walked to the door, then turned back to me. I'm going to go to the hotel and tell everyone the wedding is postponed. You should go talk to that little girl and figure out what you're going to do about her. Charles, wait. But he was already gone, leaving me alone in that tiny room in my wedding dress, holding the pieces of what was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. I sat there for a few minutes, trying to pull myself together, trying to figure out what came next. Through the thin walls, I could hear voices in the main part of the church. Anna talking softly to Emma, Father McKenna making phone calls, the sound of someone crying. When I finally opened the door and walked back into the cathedral, Anna looked up at me with eyes full of sympathy and something that might have been hope. She's been asking for you, she said quietly. She wants to know if you're really her mother, and if you are, why you went away. Emma was sitting in the front pew, swinging her legs back and forth, her yellow dress bright against the dark wood. When she saw me, she stopped swinging and looked at me with those serious dark eyes. Are you going to leave again? She asked. It was the simplest question in the world and the hardest one I'd ever been asked. I walked slowly toward the pew where Emma was sitting, my wedding dress rustling against the marble floor with each step. She watched me approach with those dark eyes that were so familiar and so strange at the same time, her small hands folded carefully in her lap. When I reached the pew, I hesitated for just a moment, then sat down beside her, leaving enough space so she wouldn't feel trapped but close enough that we could talk quietly. Anna remained standing nearby, close enough to intervene if needed, but far enough to give us some privacy. Hi, Emma, I said softly. That's your name, right? Emma. She nodded solemnly. Anna told me you might not remember my name, but I knew you would. I dreamed about you saying it. My chest tightened. You dreamed about me? All the time. You were always wearing white, just like today, and you were always looking for me, but you couldn't find me because I was too little. She tilted her head, studying my face. You look exactly like I thought you would, except sadder. I didn't know what to say to that, so I just listened. Anna says you're my real mommy, but that you had to go away when I was a baby because you were sick or something. But I don't think that's true. Emma's voice was matter of fact, the way only children can be when they're stating something they absolutely believe. I think you just didn't want me. The words hit me like a physical blow. Emma, no, that's not true at all. Then why did you leave me? She asked, and her voice got smaller, more vulnerable. The Hendersons were nice, but they weren't my real family. And then they moved away and didn't take me with them, and Anna's nice too, but she's not my real family either. Nobody's my real family except you, and you left me. I felt tears starting again, but I forced them back. This little girl didn't need to see me fall apart. She needed answers, and she deserved honest ones, even if they were complicated. I left because I thought it would be better for you, I said carefully. When you were born, I was very young and very scared, and I didn't have a lot of money or a good place to live. I thought you deserved parents who could give you everything, a nice house and toys and good schools, and all the things I couldn't give you then. Emma considered this, her brow furrowed in concentration. But I don't care about toys and houses. I just wanted my mommy. The simple honesty of it broke my heart. I know that now, but I was young and scared, and I thought I was making the right choice. I thought you'd be happier with other parents. Were you happy without me? God, this kid asked hard questions. No, I admitted. I wasn't happy without you. I thought about you every single day. I wondered what you looked like, what you liked to do, whether you were happy. I even drove by your house sometimes just to see if I could catch a glimpse of you playing in the yard. Emma's eyes widened. You did? You were watching me. Not watching exactly. Just checking on you. Making sure you were okay. I turned to face her more fully. Emma, I want you to understand something very important. I didn't leave you because I didn't love you. I left you because I loved you so much that I wanted you to have the best possible life, even if that meant I couldn't be part of it." She was quiet for a long moment, processing this. Then she asked, "Do you still love me?" "Yes," I said without hesitation. "I never stopped loving you." "Then why can't you be my mommy now? You're not young and scared anymore. You have a nice dress and you were going to live in a church, so you must have money now." I almost smiled despite everything. I wasn't going to live in the church, sweetheart. I was getting married. That means Charles and I were going to become a family. What about me? Can I be in your family too? The question hung in the air between us, and I realized I didn't have an answer. An hour ago, my future had seemed so clear, so planned out. Charles and I would get married, move into our house in Cambridge, maybe have children in a few years. It had been a simple, beautiful picture of what our life would look like. Now that picture was shattered, and I had no idea what would replace it. "I don't know, Emma," I said honestly. "Everything is very complicated right now." "Because of Charles?" she asked, and I was surprised by how perceptive she was. "Partly because of Charles, yes. He didn't know about you, and finding out this way was a big shock for him." Emma thought about this. "Is he mad at you?" "I think he's confused and hurt. When people love each other, they're supposed to tell each other important things, and I didn't tell him about you. So now he doesn't know if he can trust me." "Are you going to marry him anyway?" "I don't think so. At least, not today." Emma nodded as if this made perfect sense to her. Then she scooted closer to me on the pew, close enough that I could smell her shampoo, something fruity and sweet that was probably meant for kids. "Anna says I might have to go live with another family soon," she said quietly. "She's not supposed to keep me forever, just until they find me a real family. But I don't want another family. I want you." My heart clenched. "Emma, I know you're probably still scared," she continued, her voice very serious. "Anna told me that being a mommy is hard work and costs a lot of money. But I don't need very much. I can share a bed with you, and I don't eat very much, and I already know how to tie my shoes and brush my teeth by myself." She was trying so hard to convince me. This little girl who had been passed from family to family and was now making her case for why I should want her. It was heartbreaking and beautiful and completely unfair that a 5-year-old should have to sell herself to the mother who had given her up. "Emma, listen to me," I said, reaching out to touch her hand. "You don't have to convince me that you're worth keeping. You're not too much trouble or too expensive or any of the things you're worried about. You're perfect exactly the way you are. Then why won't you keep me?" I looked at this little girl, my daughter, who had somehow found me on what was supposed to be my wedding day and asked me the question I'd been avoiding for 6 years. Why wouldn't I keep her? The truth was, I was still scared. I was scared of being a single mother, scared of not knowing how to raise a child, scared of messing up her life the way I'd messed up my own. I was scared of losing Charles, scared of giving up the future we'd planned together, scared of starting over completely. But looking at Emma, seeing the hope and fear and love in her dark eyes, I realized that some things were more important than being scared. "Can I tell you a secret?" I asked her. She nodded eagerly. "I've been scared this whole time. Scared that I wouldn't be a good enough mommy for you. Scared that I'd make mistakes and hurt you somehow. But you know what I just figured out?" "What?" "I think maybe the best mommies are the ones who are scared, because that means they care so much about doing it right." I took a deep breath. "So if you want me to be your mommy, if you're willing to be patient with me while I figure out how to do it, then yes. I want to keep you." Emma's face lit up like Christmas morning. "Really? You really want to be my mommy? Really? I should have been your mommy all along." She launched herself at me then, wrapping her small arms around my neck and holding on tight. I held her back, feeling like something that had been broken inside me for 6 years was finally starting to heal. "I knew you'd come back," she whispered against my ear. "I knew you'd come back in a white dress and take me home." Anna approached us then, tears in her eyes. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she said softly, "but I think we need to talk about what happens next. There are legal procedures, paperwork that needs to be filed. This is wonderful, but it's going to take some time to make it official." I looked up at her, still holding Emma. "How long?" "A few months, probably. Maybe longer. The courts have to be involved since the original adoption was never finalized. The Hendersons were still in the process when they moved. But given that you're her biological mother, and you're clearly capable of providing for her." Anna smiled. "I think it's going to work out just fine." Emma pulled back to look at me. Does that mean I have to wait more? It means we both have to be patient a little longer, I told her. But it doesn't mean we have to wait to get to know each other. If Anna says it's okay, maybe you could come visit me sometimes. We could have lunch, go to the park, start figuring out how to be a family. Can we start today? Emma asked. I looked down at my wedding dress, thought about Charles at the hotel explaining to our guests why there wasn't going to be a ceremony, thought about all the plans that had just been turned upside down. Yeah, I said, surprised by how right it felt. I think we can start today. The next few months passed in a blur of legal appointments, social worker visits, and awkward conversations with well-meaning friends who didn't know what to say about my canceled wedding and sudden motherhood. I moved out of the apartment Charles and I had shared and found a 2-bedroom place in Somerville, close to Anna's house, so Emma could visit easily while we worked through the custody process. Charles and I tried to talk several times. He'd call late at night when he'd been drinking, or show up at my office with coffee and that hopeful look in his eyes that meant he wanted to try again. But every conversation ended the same way, with him asking if I was sure about Emma, and me realizing that anyone who had to ask that question wasn't the right person for either of us. I love you, he said during our last real conversation, sitting across from me at the coffee shop where we'd had our first date. I still love you, and I think I could love her too, if you'd just give us a chance to figure this out together. But you don't want to figure it out, I said gently. You want me to choose between the life we planned and the daughter I should never have given up in the first place. And I can't do that anymore, Charles. I won't do that. He left that day, and I didn't see him again until I ran into him at the grocery store 6 months later with his arm around a woman I didn't recognize. He looked happy, and I was surprised to realize I was happy for him. We'd loved each other, but we'd wanted different things, and that was nobody's fault. Emma and I spent those months learning how to be together. At first, our visits were supervised and formal: an hour at the park, lunch at McDonald's, trips to the Children's Museum where we both pretended to be more comfortable than we actually were. She was polite and careful with me, like she was afraid I might disappear again if she said the wrong thing. But gradually, we relaxed into each other. She started correcting me when I got details about her life wrong, started asking for specific things she wanted to do together. She taught me that she hated the crusts on sandwiches but loved them on pizza, that she was scared of automatic hand dryers in public bathrooms, and that she could recite every line from Frozen, but still cried every time Elsa sang Let It Go. Why does that song make you sad? I asked her one afternoon when we were curled up on my couch watching the movie for what had to be the 20th time. Because she's singing about being alone, Emma said matter-of-factly. She thinks she has to be alone to keep everyone safe, but that's not true. She just needs to find people who love her the way she is. I looked at my 5-year-old daughter, who somehow understood things about love and fear and family that had taken me years to figure out, and realized I was learning as much from her as she was from me. The legal process took 8 months total. 8 months of background checks and home visits and meetings with lawyers and social workers who all seemed determined to make sure I understood the magnitude of what I was taking on. Anna was wonderful through all of it, advocating for both Emma and me, helping us navigate the system that seemed designed to make everything as complicated as possible. On a Tuesday morning in November, I sat in a courtroom with Emma beside me, both of us dressed up and nervous, while a judge I'd never met before signed the papers that made us officially a family. Emma had insisted on wearing the yellow dress she'd worn to my wedding, even though it was getting too small for her. It's my lucky dress, she explained when I suggested we buy something new. It's the dress I wore when I found you. After the hearing, we went to Anna's house for a small celebration. She'd made a cake that said, "Welcome home, Emma," in purple frosting, and she cried harder than either of us did when we cut the first slice. "I'm going to miss having you around," she told Emma, hugging her tight. "But I'm so happy you get to be with your mama now. You can visit us," Emma said seriously. "Mama said you can come over whenever you want, and we can have tea parties." That night, Emma's first official night in our apartment, I tucked her into the bed we'd picked out together, a twin bed with a purple comforter covered in stars. She'd arranged her stuffed animals carefully on the pillow, and her few belongings were neatly organized in the dresser we'd painted white the weekend before. "Mama," she said as I was turning off the light. "Yes, sweetheart. Are you scared?" I thought about lying, about giving her the confident, reassuring answer a good mother would give. Instead, I sat down on the edge of her bed and told her the truth. A little bit, I admitted. I'm scared I won't know how to be the best mama for you. I'm scared I'll make mistakes. Emma considered this seriously. Anna told me that all mamas make mistakes sometimes, even the really good ones. She said the difference is whether they say sorry and try to do better. Anna's pretty smart. Yeah. She also said that love isn't about being perfect. It's about not giving up. I leaned down and kissed her forehead. I'm not giving up, Emma. Not ever again. Promise. I promise. A year later, we were settled into a rhythm that felt like it had always existed. Emma was thriving in first grade, making friends, and bringing home artwork that covered every surface of our refrigerator. I'd taken a new job with more flexible hours, and we developed traditions: Saturday morning pancakes, bedtime stories, Sunday walks along the Charles River where Emma would collect interesting rocks and tell me elaborate stories about where they came from. It was during one of those walks that she asked me about Charles. "Do you miss him?" she said, skipping alongside me while I pushed her bike. "Sometimes," I said honestly. "We were happy together for a while, but not happy enough to stay together even with me." I stopped walking and knelt down so we were at eye level. "Emma, I need you to understand something very important. Charles and I didn't break up because of you. We broke up because we wanted different things, and neither of us was wrong for wanting what we wanted." "What did you want that was different?" "I wanted you," I said simply. "And he wanted the life we'd planned before we knew about you. Those are both okay things to want, but they weren't the same thing." Emma nodded thoughtfully. "Do you think you'll want to get married again someday?" "Maybe. If I meet someone who loves both of us and wants to be part of our family. But only if that's what you want too." "I think I'd like that," she said. "But only if he's really nice and he doesn't mind that you love me more than anything." I laughed. "Any man worth marrying would understand that you come first, always." "Good," she said, and started skipping again. 2 years after that courthouse ceremony, Emma and I were invited to Anna's daughter's wedding. Emma, now 7 and much more sophisticated in her opinions about formal events, helped me pick out a dress, something blue and simple that she declared perfect for a wedding where you're not the bride. As we sat in the church watching Anna's daughter promise to love and honor her new husband, Emma leaned over and whispered, "Do you think you'll ever get married in a church again?" I thought about that interrupted ceremony 3 years ago, about the woman I'd been then and the woman I was now. "Maybe," I whispered back. "But if I do, it'll be different. It'll be honest from the beginning. And I'll be there. You'll be there. You'll probably be the most important person there." Emma smiled and settled back in her seat, satisfied. That night, as I was tucking her in, she asked, "Mama, do you think everything happens for a reason?" "What do you mean, sweetheart?" "I mean, do you think I was supposed to find you at your wedding? Like, maybe if I hadn't been brave enough to go to the church that day, we might never have found each other again." I thought about all the ways that day could have gone differently. If Emma had been too scared to speak up, if Anna had stopped her from going to the church, if I had been too proud or too frightened to admit the truth. So many small moments that had to align perfectly for us to end up here, in this little apartment that felt more like home than anywhere I'd ever lived. "I think," I said carefully, "that love has a way of finding its way back to where it belongs, even when we try to keep it away. And I think you were the bravest person in that church that day. Braver than you. Much braver than me. You knew exactly what you wanted, and you weren't afraid to ask for it." Emma smiled sleepily. "I wanted my mama. And now you have her. Forever. Forever and always." As I turned off her light and closed her door, I thought about the woman I'd been 3 years ago, standing at an altar in a white dress, believing she knew exactly what her future would look like. That woman had been wrong about almost everything, but she'd been right about one thing: love was worth fighting for, even when it arrived in the most unexpected way. Especially then.